Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Avani Abha, and I'm a research intern at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. I extend a warm welcome to all to today's ICS Wednesday seminar titled Regionalization of China's Belt and Road Initiative in Southeast Asia, the interplay between geo-economics and geopolitics. Since Edward Luttwak highlighted the concept of geo-economics, scholars have increasingly examined its intersection with geopolitics, particularly in the context of Asia's rising global significance. The notion of the Asian century has reinforced this debate by underscoring the emergence of a pan Asian economic space marked by both competition and cooperation. This regional configuration has been shaped by multilateral efforts to deepen regional value chains alongside China's rapid economic and military ascent. China's BRI exemplifies the strategic use of economic connectivity to enhance broader geopolitical objectives. Owing to this geographical proximity, South and Southeast Asia reflect dense political economic linkages ranging from institutional mechanisms to large scale infrastructure projects. This seminar examines the evolving regionalization of the BRI in Southeast Asia through key frameworks and initiatives. The speaker for today's seminar is Professor Ishani Naskar. She is a professor at the Department of International Relations and the head of Hari Prasanna Center for India-China Cultural Studies, Jadavpur University, Kolkata. She is also the editor of the West Bengal Political Science Review. She has worked on Indian foreign policy issues, particularly focusing on the Act East, Indo-Pacific, cultural diplomacy, and China. Recently, she represented India at the 2025 Asia Europe Large River Regional Dialogue at Shanghai. Her recent writing include Geo-economics and the Chinese Reality, the BRA experience in Southeast Asia. The chair for today's seminar is Dr. Priya Bala Singh. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at Kalindi College, University of Delhi. She has earned her PhD from the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi, and has recently completed her second master's degree in history from Harvard University. Her research focuses on international relations and global politics, particularly in South Asia, West Asia, and the Indo-Pacific, with special emphasis on security, terrorism, and peace and conflict studies. Before I hand over to the chair, I would like to ask all participants to follow a few housekeeping rules. Participants shall be muted during the seminar. Questions may be posted in the chat box along with your name and affiliation. Alternatively, you may use the raise your hand option during the interactive session. You shall then be called upon to unmute yourself. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Singh.
Yeah, thank you so much, Avani, and good afternoon, Professor Ishani Naskar also. I think we couldn't say hello before. So yeah, good afternoon, esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests, and fellow researchers. First of all, I would like to thank Institute of Chinese Studies for inviting me to chair this hopefully going to be very interactive seminar today. And so on the behalf of Institute of Chinese Studies, it is my great honor to welcome you and to give opening remarks on this timely and critical discussion, that is the regionalization of China's Belt and Road Initiative in Southeast Asia, the interplay between geo-economics and geopolitics. So as we know, the Belt and Road Initiative first unveiled in 2013, and it represents a visionary framework for global connectivity and shared development. Inspired by the historic Silk Road, it is not merely a single road or route, but a broad and evolving network of infrastructure, trade, policy, financial and people-to-people linkages spanning continents from Asia and Africa to Europe and beyond. For over a decade now, the Belt and Road Initiative has profoundly reshaped the physical and strategic landscape of Southeast Asia. Its promise of connectivity and development is immense, yet its implementation reveals a complex tapestry of motivations, negotiations, and consequences. So as we convene today, we move beyond simplistic narratives of either boundless opportunity or inherent threat Our task here is to delve into the nuanced interplay, the dynamic push and pull between the geo-economic tools of investment, trade and infrastructure, and the geopolitical realities of sovereignty, influence, and regional balance. Southeast Asia stands as the definitive test case for this interplay. Here, national development imperatives intersect with great power competition. Local agency meets global strategy. Ports and railways are not merely economic assets, they are nodes in a broader contest over the future regional order. So, understanding how Southeast Asian states navigate, adapt, and sometimes resist the BRI is essential for scholars and policymakers alike. And therefore, we exceptionally are fortunate to have Dr. Ishani Naskar, an expert on BRI, for today's seminar, who will guide us through these multifaceted dimensions. And I'm sure her insights will explore the varying national responses from mainland to maritime Southeast Asia, the evolving calculus of major powers, and the long term implications for regional integration and stability. Yeah, Avani, since she has already introduced Dr. Naskar, uh, so without any further ado, let us begin. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Naskar. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And at the outset, I must thank the Institute of Chinese Studies for asking me to be here and share what I say are my rudimentary observations about the way I see BRI being engaged in its neighborhood. And most important, I should make a kind of a caveat that I am not an expert on the BRI, but the simple reason is that I think that BRI itself is a very evolving process. And we have just roughly going to cross about a dozen of those years of being seeing one of probably the largest international initiatives taken by any Asian country in the recent known history. We all know about China. We are all, I guess, the gathering here largely are, have been studying China, have been looking at China, or are very keen about China. And it is undoubted that whether as a aggressive country, whether as a country uh, which has a lot of puzzles in it, or as a country which is an emerging power or known as a very aspiring power, China has been always in the discussions of contemporary international politics, economics, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and rightly while in the introductory remarks, I heard the name of Edward Luttwak, who had mentioned about economics. But as I see the BRI evolving, and I insist the word evolving because I think even for the people, especially Xi Jinping and his leadership, who have conceived this gigantic policy, they are also kind of taking it. They are trying to evolve themselves as they move. So, whatever point that I wish to make here is very simple. The first point that I would like to submit for everybody's consideration is the fact that I think, you know, uh, PRI is uh, an example of how an aspiring power, and I say aspiring power because I still think that China is yet to become a superpower, and China itself is very aware of that fact that it is not equivalent to the United States, either in its military capacity or in its economic capacity. And even the numbers speak for themselves. China is the second largest economy. So I do agree, and I think there is no doubt about the fact that China is going to emerge as has emerged as a big challenger. But I still say that it is an emerging power aspiring to be a global power. And such a power coming out of Asia with a certain kind of history has to first engage with its neighbors. And in this case, I think China's BRI is one of, you know, the most important tools or instruments of economic diplomacy, of economic statecraft, to which it engages with its neighbors and through which China actually seeks to achieve certain geopolitical goals that in the long run will help China to kind of emerge as a major challenger to United States. But the BRI, if you everybody we just everybody have keeps in note, the BRI is largely confined to uh, Asia, Europe, and Africa as of now. I mean, if you look at the spans, and I will request whoever is handling the PPT to please say, take over the slides as I mentioned. So the first point that I've made is that China's BRI project is one of the most important instruments in present day history, contemporary China since 2030. And that those two pictures, ladies and gentlemen, is the one on the left is President Xi Jinping talking at Kazakhstan, where he kind of presented the idea about the land belt. And to the right is the slide. In Indonesia, in the same year in 2013, he complemented that belt, the land bridge, with the maritime Silk Route. So, as I said, therefore, this is for me the most important aspect of BRI as it stands now is its outreach towards its neighborhood, and therefore the regions around China becomes extremely critical for BRI. And so, therefore, the second point that I'm trying to make is BRI also has a regionalization angle. And why do I say regionalization angle? Because China's a huge country, and its neighbors consist of almost 20, 20 plus neighbors, and they are on different parts. So therefore, the different regions have different kind of dynamics. They have different regional integration dynamics also. And here I particularly mention about South and Southeast Asia. And in the case of South Asia, as everybody knows, that it is one of the least integrated regions. So therefore, the outreach of China through the BRI is very different. Whereas the outreach or the game plan for BRI in Southeast Asia is very different, because Southeast Asia is a very, very unique place, and I'll come to that. But this slide that has been changed actually focuses on what I'm trying to argue. Is that if you when it was conceived in 2013 and when it was talked about by Xi Jinping, there was so much of excitement both in China and outside China. There was, I would say, an academic scamper to actually find out what China was going to do, and there was so much of opacity about what is actually being trying to be done by China through the Belt and Road Initiative. But gradually by 2015, we have this document, which is known as the Vision and Action Plan, which is a joint plan, they say, building Silk Route, economic belt route, and also 21st Maritime Silk Route. Now, what I would like everybody to note here are two very important things. The title itself says jointly. So please, ladies and gentlemen, let's put it that China wants or has been indicated that though it is launched by China, it is conceived by China, and it is going to be popularized by China, but they want more and more stakeholders. So because they want more stakeholders, so obviously the stakeholders who are going to be involved in this are the countries in and around China. They are not looking out for the United States to jump in. They are not looking for countries far away to jump in. But therefore, if you look at, and the vision document, ladies and gentlemen, is a declassified document. It is easily accessible. Many of you may have already looked at it. But what I'm trying to, drive at from the beginning is it talks about the spirit of open regionalism. We look at, the content of this slide, and I've taken parts of it in this. Actually, this slide tells you what actually is the Belt and Road Initiative. And says it is designed to uphold global free trade. Of course, trade is an extremely important component of the Belt and Road Initiative. An open world economy, which is very interesting, which China is talking about. And look at the kind of tariff wars that China is looking at, we are looking at, whereas China is, kind of espousing for an open world economy. But it also speaks of the spirit of open regional cooperation. This, I think, is extremely important. Similarly, it says jointly creating an open, inclusive, balanced regional economic cooperation architecture. That when architecture means the infrastructural and the infrastructural plus architecture that one is talking about. I'll talk about it in a minute or two. And the third is it also aims to promote the connectivity, extremely important. Connectivity of Asian, European, African continents. So this is basically the continental part we're talking about. And then the adjacent seas, which is the territorial seas and beyond, and strengthen partnership among countries of Belt and Road, set all multidimensional, multi-tier composite connectivity networks. So composite, it is not only physical network, it is talking about also other forms of connectivity network. So the idea from right here, I think, is also to create some form of interdependency, which is extremely important in economic diplomacy and economic statecraft. Please, can you switch to the next slide, please? Yeah. So the next slide is even more critical for me because in this, and if you go to this document, you will see the word framework used, and therefore I've used the word framework. And in this, you can distinctly see the areas that are going to be covered. Okay. It takes, and therefore I've used the various colors to kind of, point out. It is going to cover, it is going to bring together. Wordings are extremely important, and anybody who is doing civic studies would be very, very sure, would be aware of the fact that the words that are being used by the leadership and the official documents are themselves very, very important in understanding what is being taught, what China is actually trying to hint at. So this will bring together China with Central Asia, Russia, Europe, the Baltics, linking China with Persian Gulf, Mediterranean Sea, through Central Asia, West Asia, connecting China with Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Indian Ocean. And this is where we are bringing down the focus specifically to Southeast Asia. And this is the Silk Road economic belt. So there is, as I said, there is a road part of it, and there is also a maritime part of it. And the 21st century maritime Silk Road, which is the second point, tells you where it begins and where it's going to finish. China's coast will begin from or go from China's coast to Europe through the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean in one route, and from China's coast through the South China Sea to the South Pacific in the other. And this will bring about smooth, secure things. Very interestingly, it also speaks about creating a new Eurasian land bridge. So, ladies and gentlemen, the BRI's main area of framework is the Eurasian land bridge, which means China, Mongolia, Russia, China, Central Asia, China, West Asia, Central Asia, West Asia, and the one very critical for us, which we will discuss right now in a little while, is China, Indo-China Peninsula Economic Corridor, which are extremely important. And mark these words, is these economic corridors will take advantage of the international transport routes. So already the routes that are in existence, some of the routes that are already in the process of construction or are already in progress, they are also taken into account, relying on some core cities that are always there or has been there along the Belt Road, and asking key economic industrial parks as cooperation platforms. So please, for me, my understanding or interpretation of this particular clause is that it is not only about building new ones, but also taking advantage of already existing infrastructure. And that is exactly what I'm going to talk about in GMS. And here, the two important corridors that have been mentioned as very critical is the China-Pakistan economic corridor. Please note that this has been mentioned exclusively. China Pakistan Economic Corridor and Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar Economic Corridor are closely related to the Belt and Road Initiative and therefore requires close cooperation and greater progress. So these two specific corridors which are very pertinent to the subcontinent and Southeast Asia and the Indonesia. This geography, these two have been earmarked specifically. That means these are of these are of extreme crucial importance to China. So, and please, one must also note that the BCIM is no longer known as the BCIM because India is not a part of these corridor structures, and therefore it is known as the Bangladesh, China, Myanmar corridor. In fact, it is more known as the China-Myanmar economic corridor. Now, I therefore having just trying to contextualize that why I see that the BRI is the greatest economic and geopolitical instrument for regional engagement of China as an aspiring global power, but yet I think it is still a regional major power. And so for me, why do I select Southeast Asia and why did I not go for South Asia? Because Southeast Asia, with its ASEAN story, is something which is very unique. It is extremely, the way ASEAN has evolved, the journey of ASEAN from 1960s to what we look at it right now is a marvelous story. And not only that, the the way ASEAN integration has been taking place and continues to evolve has heralded what a scholar has mentioned that it has heralded something called the new Asian regionalism. What is the new Asian regionalism? The new Asian regionalism is actually which is an alternate to the new international economic order, right? And the new Asian regionalism has two components to it. One is the existing or the kind of regional organizations and trade institutions that were existing or platforms that were existing. For instance, the APEC and ASEAN. Alongside, you have the mega trade pacts that have come up, like the RCEP. We all know about what the RCEP is, or the Comprehensive Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or the acronym of which is CPTPP. So this kind of development that has taken place, which is leading to more and more integration of value chains, of networking, and creating more and more kind of economic and other kinds of interdependency, has it says that this has created this new form of Asian regionalism to which ASEAN as an association, as a trading bloc, as a regional entity is itself is central to this process. People are also talking about, scholars are also talking about the ASEAN consensus. So what is the ASEAN consensus? So very short, because time is not much on my side, I will just say that ASEAN has its own way of operations and which has developed from its own, its own practices, its own historical experiences, its own values, its own, its regional requirements and its own experiences. Please remember that ASEAN started in 1967 as a association which was contextualized at that point in times of communism and Cold War. From there, it has now come towards community building. So this huge, in Asia, I would for myself say this is one of the most successful, fantastic stories of how regional organizations can come together of post-colonial societies, which are varied, which is plural, which has a lot of challenges, which has seen wars in the case of, how in Southeast Asia we have had one of the longest Cold War histories. So all put together, this ASEAN story and ASEAN consensus is now the buzzword in Asian regionalism. And so alongside what I would say is why I choose Southeast Asia is China realizes this is extremely important. China realizes that the ASEAN integration story is something that that China can be a part of, because China believes that in order to become a to become a powerful regional actor, it has to become stakeholder in the ASEAN story. It has to get engaged in the ASEAN regional dynamics, notwithstanding the fact that we all know that there are issues between ASEAN and China related to the marine domain, that is the South China Sea. But in spite of that, notwithstanding that, the idea that China feels and China realizes that it must engage with with ASEAN in order to become a part of, the entire Asian regionalism, such that it can, in the not so distant future, become the pilot of this whole, integration process and this entire economic, this marvelous story that is unfolding in this part of the world, right? And so therefore there is also something known as the Beijing Consensus. And what is Beijing Consensus? The Beijing Consensus is China's own normative architecturing about open trade, as it is mentioned in the BRI. So the BRI cannot be looked as a single kind of, a maze of just corridors and roads and bridges and, various kind of economic activities. And it is also related to China's desire of an alternative alternative normating ordering. And the Beijing Consensus, if it goes go to the literature, is, is indicative of the fact that China would like to, in the long run, become, in the driver's seat of this new Asian regionalism, that which will challenge what exists in the West as a neoliberal kind of a framework. So this is a different kind of a framework that could emerge in the future. So that is the reason why I think for China, Southeast Asia and ASEAN is an extremely important region. Now, having said that, does this really mean that we have started, this relationship has started right from the BRI? No. So what I'm going to try and tell in the next few 2-3 minutes is that how China has tried to, and remember, China was known as a communist country, an aggressive candidate in Cold War. China has been actively involved in the Indo-China wars and was looked at with great suspicion. So therefore, the story of China getting engaged with ASEAN, and at one point of time, Southeast Asia was largely known as ASEAN, especially after 1990. So China's engagement with ASEAN actually began in the 1990s, where it became dialogue partner, and it started gradually, starting a conversation with ASEAN. And definitely the ASEAN members at that point of time were also trying their luck with various regional kind of, instrumentalities, and were also not very sure as to how to deal with China and how to, how to take China. That was also one story, but it was the 1997 Asian economic crisis which unfolded, where China took another, I would say, a very smart step of economic diplomacy and decided not to devalue its money, which actually helped to kind of, settle a little way crisis. And China went out of the way to actually help at that point of time almost, the economic meltdown of various economies that were taking place. And this actually gave a lot of confidence. This gave a lot of, assurance to the Southeast Asian economies, the ASEAN countries and members that, we have a well-meaning, or at least a neighbor which is now trying to do well with us, wants to have a good conversation and wants to be a good friendly neighbor. At least that was the starting point for me, I think. And from there on, China has evolved to create, and there are the friendship or the relationship, if not friendship, the relationship has evolved very gradually, where you actually have China, ASEAN Plus mechanism. China is a part of ASEAN Plus 3, ASEAN China mechanism. You have the CAFTA falling, which is a free trade area. And from 2011, you also have ASEAN China centers taking place. You have permanent mission in ASEAN, countries, and they're very active, they're very visible. If you go to the various, ASEAN China centers of the different countries, you see the flurry of activities they're involved in. And the CAFTA, which was signed in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, in 2024, now you have a 3.0 negotiation. That means look at the journey that has taken place. And it includes, promoting digital kind of, contacts and the green economies, talking more and more about supply chains, talking about customs, easing custom procedures. So the point And please remember also, during the pandemic, the health shield, the kind of vaccines that will be given, the kind of other, say non-traditional security issues that China has tried to, come up with and help. So this story, actually, what I'm trying to indicate is just even before what would be seen as 2013, that the journey of the BRI and reaching out to its neighbors, in terms of also in terms of peripheral diplomacy, China already had a deeply entrenched kind of a relationship, foothold in Southeast Asian economies and Southeast Asian polities. So this story, it's not that in 2000 you just jump up and start saying, "Oh, come on, China has now started engaging with Southeast Asia and bringing, making forays and making, lot of having a lot of policies and investing furiously." No, this has been always there. And one of the most interesting thing, again, which makes Southeast Asian ASEAN, to me personally, very interesting, is the way they have tried to, you know tailor their needs and create flexible framework within ASEAN. So ASEAN itself is a regional grouping which has 10 members, and then there are plus mechanism. But within ASEAN, because the different countries had different history, they were at different parts of the Cold War divide. So their economies are also of different, levels. They are not all the same. And in order to take care of the different needs, they have created what is the unique framework, which I say the sub-regional framework. So ASEAN actually flaunts a number of sub-regional frameworks. Could anybody just change the slide? I think I may be having a slide on the sub-regional framework. Could the slide be kindly changed? Okay, so this I missed. So this is just a very simple, I thought there may be people who can, relate, because I'm not being able to see my scholars or my audience. So therefore, I just put a slide of what is the belt, overland, and what is the maritime. Please quickly change the slide also. Yeah, so yes. So this is the point that I'm trying to say. So ASEAN is very unique. So as I said, it makes tailor-made, kind of arrangements to fit into the different requirements and address the different level of economic growth. So there are a number of, these examples of the how framework. So there are two kinds. One are growth triangles, and then it's sub-regional frameworks. So the growth triangles, one of the oldest growth triangles is the Sijori growth triangle, which is on your right side of the slide, right? And then you have also the Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore growth triangle. You have the Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. These are old ones, which is on your left side of the slide. If you can see the colorful ones, it points out. But later you have also the Ayawada Chow, Froyam, Mekong Economic Strategy, which is known as the SEMES. And these are the various kinds of, flexible, tailor-made, based on geographical contiguity, of course, based on also the facility of connectivity, free flow of goods and everything. So you have these sub-regional frameworks which has been working. In fact, the Sijori was formed in 1989. Okay, but alongside also from taking cue from this growth triangles, they have something called the sub-regional framework. And in this sub-regional framework, you have very two important frameworks that I'm going to talk about next. One is the Greater Mekong sub-region, extremely important, and the Pan-Bubu Gulf Economic Cooperation, or the PBG. Okay, can this next slide be taken, please? Yeah. So this is ASEAN China, ASEAN GMS. I have put a slide. So these two are extremely important. And because these two actually, in a way, is depicts or gives indication or speaks about China's peripheral diplomacy. Because China actually tries to integrate its own peripheral geographies, provinces, areas with the neighboring regions. So if you look at the GMS, I will take now the case of the GMS because that is where I'm actually heading for. Before I go to the GMS, may I ask the chair how long am I allowed to continue, please?
Yeah, Dr. Nasser, I think the total presentation for 30-35 minutes.
Ma'am, could you be a little more louder, please?
Yeah, so the presentation will be for 30-35 minutes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So can I get another roughly 5 minutes to
Yeah,
7 to 10
sure,
minutes?
sure. Yeah, no
Yeah, yeah.
problem.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Right. So what I'm trying to say here is, what is the GMS? So the GMS is probably for both China and for ASEAN, that oldest, chunk of sub-regional diplomacy, of peripheral diplomacy, right? Is the It is the first sub-regional grouping, right, where China started participating since 1990. And if you can look at the map of the GMS on your right side, I hope it is visible to everybody. So the GMS actually is the kind of the sub-regional framework where through which the Mekong runs. So you have the CLMV countries, right? You have Thailand. Later it's been extended to Malaysia also. But what is important to note, that it involves only two provinces of China in Southeast. Okay, it involves Yunnan and Guangxi. These are the two provinces that are actually involved in this. And the Mekong is also known as the Lakang for China. So in 1994 already, this is long before BRI was launched. Please mark the dates I'm using. So long before, way before 2013, in 1994, China had established the National Lakang Mekong Development Corporation Group, right? It was like a corporation which actually was making a roadmap for connectivity between that part of China and the CLMP countries till Thailand, correct? And from 2000 onwards, this original plan of the roadmap of cooperation through the 1994 Lakang Mekong National Lakang Mekong Development Group, this has now taken up onto a connectivity program. And very interesting part of it is that it has an agreement to make Lakang Mekong River commercially navigable. It can navigate through, this is also a matter of transport and navigation. And over the period, it has gained access to agreement for, cross-border passenger transport, intergovernmental agreement, regional power trade, also kind of arrangements have been done, right? And so therefore, basically these two provinces, for China, it's not the entire China, it is only these two provinces. That is the reason why I'm saying this is also an example of peripheral diplomacy for China, right? Yunnan basically is more focused on the GMS, while for me, I think also the, Guangxi once is more focused on the PBG economic cooperation, correct? So Yunnan is more into this, and through this framework, uh, you have more recent frameworks developing on the Lakang Mekong kind of framework. You have the regional investment framework of 2024 to 26, which is a 3-year-old, pipeline project, which actually has, believe me or not, 128 big and small projects involving transport, agriculture, solar energy, etc., etc. And so, therefore, through this already existing framework, which was there from 1994, gradually through incremental investment and incrementally, the GMS has become one of the most critical, I would say, bridges of economic and other kinds of diplomacy, which gives also China, kind of geopolitical dividends, because you get access to these economies, to these polities, and this way, this has get engaged. So what has now happened when BRI was formed in 2013? That is what I'm trying to argue, that China has been always entrenched in ASEAN economies, has had access to these economies, has done its homework to get access to ASEAN economies and polities. And from 2013, the BRI has actually accentuated this process. It has amped its process, right? So what is the BRI trying to do? And I'll take this another exactly 5 to 7 minutes, 5 minutes, I will say, not much more, because that has lots of details. I cannot do this in a very short period of time. So what actually it has been now done is that the BRI has now started taking over the existing kind of connectivity roadmap that was there, or the master plan of the GMS. So GMS had a huge, kind of a roadmap. That entire roadmap of connectivity, various projects, there are three economic corridors which are extremely important. Economic transport corridors. One is the East-West Economic Corridor, the other one is the North-South Economic Corridor, and there is another Southern Economic Corridor. And also there existed an ASEAN Mekong development framework, development cooperation framework. This has been taken together with the Lakaon Mekong schemes. So what has been now gradually being done through the BRI is that there are mergers taking place, not in the formal sense of the sense, but there is coming together of the earlier existing projects, and now the BRI, now that China has made it so big to humongous, they are kind of taking in and trying to, coalesce these projects together. Can we go to the next slide? I think I can give you a rough map of, yeah, so this speaks of the corridors on the right side. If you see the north-south corridor, the east-west corridor, and the southern. So these are not the corridors that has been conceived by BRI. No, no, no. What BRI is only doing is taking over them. They are funding them. They are making them. And all this is a part of which I mentioned in the earlier slide, the China, Indochina Peninsular Economic Corridor, which is one of the 6 corridors of the original BRI mapping. Okay, so to this, there are roads. As I said, there are corridors, there are road, there are expressway. Very important part of it is also the Kunming Singapore Railway Project. This is, ladies and gentlemen, very important because it is part of the original, ASEAN Mekong Basin Development Cooperation. So this extremely important because it has many routes that goes, and the entire map, if you see, some of it you can see. To your left looks a very, very complicated, heavily dense kind of a roadmap of the various connectivity projects. Ladies and gentlemen, this was originally started by the ADB. The ADB started much, even before, long ago, because the ADB was very interested in this part of the world. So this has been gradually now being not, I would say, taken over, but in many cases replaced by the funding by, Chinese companies. So the details is very long. You have many corridors. I'll just give you one. So therefore, there are, like you have express roadways also taking place. There are 3 routes. There is a central route. There is also a eastern route, so all going from Kunming, okay? Western route, and all these routes, they go, they have expressway which goes, connects, for instance, Chokpu to Kunming, we all know about, and that is again a part of the China-Myanmar economic corridor. You have the Kunming, Hanoi, Phong corridors. So various kinds of railway projects are also there. And statistics says almost China is involved in more than 20 projects of this part of the world, which has a cost of over $50 billion. So China, ladies and gentlemen, has been investing, getting involved, have become serious stakeholders. Now, what at the end of this, almost at the semi-penultimate point that I would like to make, because I will not have far more time, is an argument that has developed, and it is rightly so, is that the question, because since we are talking about interdependency and we are talking about geo-economics and statecraft, or what weaponization comes into play. Now, the idea of Farrell's, weaponization, it actually has certain conditions which says that, economic interdependency, economic dependency, when some countries become dependent on another country or another set of countries, those countries have a number of instruments, economic sanctions that can actually give a big economic setback to the recipient countries. So in that sense, is there a weaponization? One of the popular narratives that is made is the question of, debt diplomacy. That there is a debt trap kind of a story that unfolds. And we all know stories about what has happened in South Asia. People are talking about Hambantota. Some people are also talking slightly about Gwadar. The overburdening of the loans, the debts that are on the recipient countries. And this is a part of the BRI team. China makes them more and more dependent. Now, here what I think and what I see the way it has happened in Southeast Asia, especially in the greater Mekong sub-region, it is extremely important to understand much actually depends on the ability and the capacity of the recipient countries to negotiate and bargain with China. It is extremely important. I will just give you one or two examples. Say this is not a case of GMS, but since this is an extremely important, kind of a uh, point that I'm trying to make. For instance, in Philippines, which is a part of Southeast Asia, not a part of GMS, three railway projects. Uh, the Bicol project, the Mindanao project, and the Clark Bay, Subic Bay, Bay Free zones have been dropped by Philippines. Philippines simply disagreed with the terms and conditions that were laid by the Chinese, and the negotiations could not move further. So therefore, it is the freedom of the receiving countries actually to decide which of the projects to go for, which are the conditions to accept. In contrast, in the GMS, if you look at Laos, Laos has been actually trying to get, because Laos is a landlocked state, ladies and gentlemen, it has been desperate to reach out to the outside world and to the sea. And Laos has been a victim of the long drawn Indochina kind of Cold War. So there are in China for this high speed railway project, which is a dream project for Laos state. Three companies from China are actually, investing they have taken over almost 70% of the stake of this venture. It is a joint venture. Remember, we always in the first slide was talking about jointly developing everything. So this is a joint venture. And so because in joint venture, rest of the 30% also loan has been taken by Laos from again Chinese company. So the popular narrative is that Laos has been lured into debt traps, by this kind of marketing, the way the projects have been marketed about connectivity, also about there are some hydel projects that are also there, and this has actually benefited more of China because Laos has become more and more dependent. But there is another side of the story, which is I'm trying to make a point, is that when the every project has specifications. When specifications were being made as to how much cost will which project will cost, when the estimation was being, then the negotiations were being done. Uh, China had offered higher speed specifications, had given higher quotations, and it seems that the Laotian government could not negotiate enough. And also at one point in time, because Laos was also a very not so easy terrain, to negotiate in terms of rail down rail tracks. Chinese had also said that some of the projects are not going to be viable, and if you want to do it, it's going to be very, very expensive. It's going to take a lot of money to get the rails to certain kind of terrains and mountains. But because Laos, this has been a dream project, Laos went overboard and agreed to those very high specifications. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it really depends on how the receiving country is being able to negotiate. Again, if you look at Thailand, Thailand has been negotiated better because they have looked at the projects through PPP. Some of the projects Thailand said, no, we will do to the PPP model. You do not need to fund us. In the case of Myanmar, it is not exactly or entirely about the monetary aspect of it, but the kind of political dispensation one is looking at. For instance, the 2021 coup has got a lot of changes and given a lot of jitters to Chinese stakeholders, investors, even the Chinese state. The UDSP is more skeptical about Chinese investments than the National League of Democracy. And there has been popular rising ethnic kind of dissonance against the kind investment in sensitive areas like the Mitsusen, like in Leptadung copper mine, so things like that. So what I'm trying to say that this idea or this narration of debt diplomacy must be seen on both sides. It is very important, right? And from the Chinese side, it is also as I said, I would say with finality that the BRI still go to many miles, and therefore for China, even investing, getting involved, like getting more and more stakes in Southeast Asia and in these kind of major connectivity projects, the major chunk of connected projects is actually in the GMS region. So here, the kind of investment they are doing some of them they have realized, the Chinese investors and the state has realized that this is again, white elephant projects. Those projects which will not actually yield result and will lead to a less loss of money. So what the China has now done, if you look at China, BRI 2.0, it is an abridged version. It is much more modest. It has scaled down the amount of investment they're trying to do here, right? So China is, BRI is not only about materialistic gains. It has, China also needs to understand, for China, it is not only investing and trying to get over economies, it is also trying to have some normative stand in these parts of the world. It is extremely important, as a rising power and a friendly neighbor and an aspiring nation, that they offer something new to the ASEAN. And so therefore, in having friendly gestures and becoming, the trying to understand the architecture of ASEAN, the norms and the values, and trying to go along with it. For instance, China has been long a member, have signed Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. So there is also a kind of, I think, a normative stand which China has to protect, and therefore regionalization, the term that I've used, I consciously use, regionalization of the BRI is something that China has to take very consciously in order to gain, the kind of comprehensive security that China is talking about, whereas ASEAN is also talking about collective responsibility. There has to be some form of normative thinking to take together. They must come together. They have to find commonalities, and they're kind of to a certain extent, you know, towards commonality. And now that we are living in the world, and this is a last point that I would like to make, that we are living in a post globalization phase, in the sense that the original globalization discourse has taken a lot of turn, and China's kind of rise through the BRI and other things is not, is kind of questioning Western neoliberal democracy, where China has its own form of globalization dynamics. And the BRI is an extremely, I think, important example as to how, both geoeconomics and geopolitics can have an interface. But I strongly contend, and I constantly think that, China's regional dynamics in the future is also going to impact how the BRI will ultimately become a kind of successful platform for China's rise in Asia, and subsequently emerging as an aspiring power in global politics. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Chair, for considering my point.
Uh, Thank you so much, Dr. Naskar, for such a detailed, I would say, and empirically grounded and expansive presentation on the theme that we chose today. Thank you so much. And you bring out such important, points in your presentation, like BRI has spirit of regionalization from the very start, and we need to be very careful about how we kind of read the entire, document, and every word is important in that sense. And then you bring out the point of peripheral diplomacy that China engages, during BRI. And the sub-regionalism, I think, that you brought out is a very, very essential and important point that you bring. And the fact that the groundwork for BRI in Southeast Asia was already done by China in a way, and it kind of just accentuated with its engagement in BRI, and that China should have also have a not just regionalization consciousness, but also a normative aspect in dealing with its neighbors as far as BRI is concerned. I think it was really a very insightful, presentation, and I'm sure there would be a lot of questions that would be in waiting. And so the format for as we go forward would be, I think Avani will read the questions, and I would request the audience to kind of, if they have a question, please write down in the chat box, and Avni will, kind of take the questions from there for the speaker to answer. And, being the chair, I will take the first opportunity to ask a question, from Dr. Naskar, because she talked about Southeast Asia, and in the beginning, I remember that Dr. Naskar, you mentioned that Southeast Asia, BRI, China's involvement with Southeast Asia as far as BRI is concerned is very different from South Asia because of its, not so much of regional integrity. So, being from all of us present, you said that you're not an expert, but being, having expertise more than that, what we would have, it would be great if you could, talk a bit more about how do you see the differences between South Asia and Southeast Asia as far as PRI is concerned. So that would be my question to Dr. Naskar, if she can answer that.
Thank you, Chair. So should I answer your question first and then like take it, or
Yeah,
should we bunch them?
yeah, I mean, I request the audience to kindly write their questions on the chat box. Is that fine, Avni, if they write it on the chat box, or you want them to ask personally?
Yes, sure, they can write it on the chat box.
Yeah, so by the time, ma'am, they're writing on the chat box, I think you can
Yeah,
take
so I
it.
think, okay, fine. So, thank you, Professor, for your question. It's indeed a very interesting. So, if I just may take this opportunity to say that I'm already writing on something which should be out by the end of the year. I'm hoping, yeah, so the publishers will, at the end of the day, be able to bring it out. So, where I've kind of argued that, just probably as a sequel story to what I'm saying right now, that for South Asia, this is the least integrated part of the world. And the region why is the kind of history that we all carry. And that history directly impacts our contemporary politics. And this has created, unfortunately, the SARC has been an unhappy story. We have really not got much anyway. And as I would say, if I may be pardoned for the word, but for lack of a better way to describe, we have taken a second word best, which is BIMSTEC. And BIMSTEC, it started in 1997. It was in kind of a lull. And then again in the 2000s, we see the coming back of BIMSTEC through BRICS, the BRIC conference and the BIMSTEC coming together. By the way, BIMSTEC is also a sub-regional organ arrangement as far as South Asia is concerned. So because of the kind of historical baggage we have, we do not have that kind of regional kind of platforms through which China could anchor, could use, or could exploit, if anybody would like to use that term, to kind of have more and more deeper, footsteps into South Asia. But having said so, therefore, what China has been trying to do is engage bilaterally with different countries. And because with India, the story with China is extremely difficult and complicated and nuanced, right? Many kinds of words have been shown. Some people are saying it is frenemy. Some people are saying it is cooperation, things like that. The various adjectives have been coming around to exactly kind of tell what is the nature of India-China relationship. So that itself speaks volume for in China's ability to create some kind of regional mechanism through which everybody would come together along with China, so that BRI could actually have a strong foothold in South Asia. So it is very customized way of things. So that you in China tried to have the BCIM, but then India obviously for obvious reasons did not agree to that corridor. So the corridor has now come down to Bangladesh, China, Myanmar corridor. And so you see China being engaged with Bangladesh at a certain kind of footing, with Sri Lanka at a certain kind of footing, with various countries in and around India and in South Asia. So China has found a very customized way of getting engaged with South Asian countries, and they do not. So all these countries have expressed their support for the BRI. That is very important. So for the BRI in South Asia, it has reached out to different countries at different paces and different lengths, depending on what kind of requirements those countries and what kind of situations they have. What is the content? What is the fabric? What is the policy? So it's very different. Whereas in Southeast Asia, the regional integration story has been fantastic compared to South Asia. So therefore, there have been existing mechanisms already within the Southeast Asian framework, to which China could easily get involved as a stakeholder. The idea was to get that kind of a foothold or achieve that kind of create that sense of confidence within ASEAN countries. Not all the ASEAN countries see ASEAN in the same way. For instance, in terms of the South China Sea conflict. So the South China Sea conflict doesn't bother Laos, for instance. It doesn't bother Thailand, for instance, you know. So there it is very different. Whereas Vietnam is a direct stakeholder, whereas Brunei is a direct stakeholder, whereas Philippines is a direct stakeholder. But because these mechanisms are existing, and because of, as I said, the sub-regional framework, there's so many platforms to which China can engage, that China's BRI has found it more smoother to access Southeast Asia compared to South Asia. That is my understanding.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Nissi. Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions. Avni, just go ahead. And, yeah.
Yes, so the first question is from Miss Sukanya Bali. She asks, within the regionalization of the BRI, do you think national hedging strategies by ASEAN members, such as Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam, strengthen or weaken ASEAN's collective posture towards China?
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I think I'll answer that because I'll forget. I'm getting old and I'm not good at my memory. So yeah, thank you, Ms. Bali, for your question. So yeah, so see, hedging is a part of modern day geopolitics, if I can be as blanket as that. So Indonesia is definitely a very important country in Southeast Asia, being the largest and having a largest Muslim population, which is also, you know, you also have to look at the domestic fabric of each of the members. And ASEAN has been, Indonesia has been one of the pioneering states in the formation of ASEAN. So it has been a very telling impact. But having said this, if you look at the kind of relationship Indonesia has been having with China, right? Uh, it is also very interesting. It has been in, it has not denied, it has not struck out the BRI and its projects. So yes, Indonesia is definitely a country with, who has the capacity to hedge, who has, you know, the option to access other countries, to be looking out for other countries, and so too for Vietnam. And Vietnam is extremely, you know, interesting because Vietnam has had a history with both China and with the United States. And Vietnam at this point in time is flaunting almost a two-digit kind of a, you know, growth rate. So both the United States and China are looking forward to it. So, you know, for my understanding, and I think the third country was Philippines, if I'm not mistaken. So my point here is to Ms. Bali is that, you know, ASEAN may be, you know, a good story about regional integration in Asia, but having, and to the extent that they are now into community building, the three pillars of, you know, the political security community, the economic, social, cultural, and there is a cultural pillar, three pillars of the community building process. But having said this, I think it is also important to understand that within ASEAN, also there are differences. It is very natural that differences exist because at one point in time they have been also part of, you know, the divide of the, you know, during Cold War there have been different sides of the Cold War divide, different sides of, you know, of the so-called, you know, the United States and Soviet Union and China being there. So having, I think ASEAN as a collective has evolved, has come up very gradually, but as some of the countries, you know, like you correctly said about Indonesia, even Singapore, I think you mentioned Singapore. Singapore is again you know, a very growing economy with a lot of stakes. With has a lot of involvement with China. It has strong involvement, and it has been quite also friendly for India also. You know, so every country, I think, keeps in its basket plan B, which they can use for hedging and will not allow China to overwhelm ASEAN completely. But at the same time, I also think as far as, you know, collective responsibility and, you know, collective resilience is concerned, ASEAN has come a great way, a long way in establishing relationship with China. And China has itself, you know, evolved. It has learned from ASEAN how to, you know, connect with various ASEAN countries and come forward and, you know, create a kind of chemistry between these countries. I think that is my point.
Thank you, ma'am. We have another question from Mr. Sanup Sajan Koshi. He thanks you for the engaging presentation and he says that you argued outcomes that vary with recipient agency. He agrees that as well. Given the strong country specific and regional differences across Southeast Asia, how would you operationalize and measure agency, which what specific indicators? Also for Southeast Asia, global or global South recipients, to what extent does the identity of the donor or stakeholder actually matters? Is it from Japan, US, Europe, or China, etc.? So yeah,
Uh,
that's it.
yeah, so if I've got his question correct, you know, uh, I think he is trying to find certain parameters to understand how recipient countries interact. Is it written on the chat box? Can I? It was quite a bit long question. Can I just see the
Yes, ma'am,
chat box?
it's written on the chat box.
Can I just have a look at it so I can read it and then I can kind of respond? Yeah. Uh, is it on the chat box? I cannot see it.
It's there on the chat box. Um,
I'll just check.
Yeah, if you open the chat box and just scroll, you will see the last messages, that question.
Trying to see, but the last message is not coming on my chat box. So I'll just pause. So can you just repeat that once again? That I think should help.
yes, yes. So you argued outcomes vary with recipient agency. I agree
Mm-hmm.
to that as well. Given the
Mm-hmm.
strong country specific and regional differences across Southeast Asia, how would you operationalize and measure agency? What specific indicators? Secondly,
Okay.
also for Southeast Asia or Global South recipients, to what extent does the identity of the donor or stakeholder actually matters if it is from Japan, US, Europe, or China?
Okay. Right. Right. Now I got it. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So for the first question, very frankly, I have not thought much about how to operationalize, agency, but my argument was, in more in terms of political negotiations. The political negotiations is extremely important. That's what I understood from the different, kind of negotiations patterns that I saw. And in that, I found that the countries which have, uh, development goals which they cannot fund themselves, which they cannot take. They have taken support from ADP, they have taken support even from IFF. But the terms and conditions, this is, I think, one of the most important parameters. The terms and conditions laid out by China and other comparable agencies, it also really matters. And so that has also led to, a lot of countries, especially countries like Laos and Vietnam, coming to agree on China, coming more closer to China than other agencies that have come, how they have kind of come up with various loans and grants. The other thing that I think in terms of the identity of, the stakeholder, whether it's Japan or whether it's, you know, US or China, as you mentioned, uh, I am not sure what kind of identity you are talking about. But if you're talking in terms of, a kind of perception about that country as to what vis-a-vis the recipient country, uh, I think to a certain extent it does matter. But at the end of the day, what I see is that China, specifically as a country which has been giving out loans and grants, and also has been giving, loans at very attractive terms, and at times also, allowing loans to stretch over a certain period of time, giving them extra time also. I think that kind of that kind of terms and conditions are very attractive for these countries. And because I would also say, I think over a period of time, Chinese engagement with these countries and also Japanese investments have been quite welcome for a very long time. Previous to, if you see the history, previous to the BRI and even, in early 80s or mid 80s to 90s, if you see, the maximum amount of investments have actually come from the ADB, from the Japanese foundations. So Japan is also an extremely important donor out here. So I think the if you call about the identity, that for me is the perception of the country vis-a-vis the recipient countries. I think that actually depends on what kind of development goals the countries have and what are the terms and conditions that are being, given to. And that I think also applies for largely to South, countries of the South, largely, but particularly for South and Southeast Asia, I think the perception of the individual countries and the terms and conditions are very serious, I think, components as far as loans and grants are concerned.
Thank you, ma'am. We don't have any further questions in the chat box at the moment. I request the participants to please raise their hands if they have any questions.
Yeah, they can raise their hands, and I think we can take up two more questions. As far as the time, we need to wind this up by 4:30, I suppose, if I'm not wrong. So I think we can take a few more questions before that.
Mm. In the meantime, I have one question if I could do that, Professor Naskar. Um, You talked about China's peripheral diplomacy, in which it has been engaging with these countries long before the BRI. But we also know that China has ongoing territorial disputes with several countries in the Southeast Asia, including Philippines, Vietnam, Japan. But we have seen that apart from India, most of these countries have agreed to participate in China's Belt and Road Initiative. And now, in light of Xi Jinping's recent small but beautiful approach under BRI 2.0, under which the focus has shifted to smaller and economically more viable projects such as green energy, digital, or health oriented projects, do you think India could perhaps enhance its leverage with while dealing with China by engaging or selectively participating in the BRI framework?
So I think that is for actually the policymakers to respond. But uh, as a person who has seen actually, the how India-China dynamics have been yo-yoing a bit. There has been a strong lobby. If I do not know many members of the senior members of the ICS, including Madam Oberoi and Professor Mahanti. They have, at one point of time, they have worked very vigorously and rigorously for the BCIM. And they have been, we have had initiatives like the Calcutta Kunming Initiative, of which I was a part. And so the track two initiatives for very long have seen, benefits, as you say, selectively and very cautiously participating. But, uh, given the kind of history and the kind of, I would say the basic line of India-China relationship is the one is competition, and the competition is absolutely healthy. There is nothing wrong in having competition, and two developing Asian countries, two Asian giants would compete. That's all very natural. But in in this competition, at points where China has, actually not been keeping the rules of the game as pure and simple competition, and has actually intervened in domestic security related issues, I do not think. And one more thing about the BRI is that, you know the BRI has been also problematized in a certain manner. It has been pitched in a certain manner, particularly in Indian policymaking and also in academicians, which to a certain extent is absolutely justified. But the problematization creates, screams for solutions. There are no solutions in sight except striking it off as a zero-sum game, right? One of the basic reasons, apparently, which is also given, and again, I think it is justified from a certain perspective, is for the CPEC to be not accepted because it runs through POK, for instance. This is one, and it is an extremely sensitive issue, which cannot be actually bargained out. You cannot bargain. You cannot go down on your territorial sovereignty. That is a thumb rule. So there are issues. That is what I'm saying. So, China's relationship, India has been yo-yoing, and competition is absolutely fine. It is justified, but the rules of the game and at which China wants to play and the rules of the game in which India wants to play are not on the level playing field. So that makes India's participation in the BRI, and as I say, through BRI in China actually wants to emerge as an alternate head or the beacon of an alternative ordering. If you may note the history of India and China right from their start in the 1940s, after India became independence and China became a communist country, both have been pitching for leadership. So therefore, for India to become a party to that, alternative ordering and not actually itself imagining of another alternative space is something that I don't think it will come very easy. And particularly with the kind of international ordering that we are seeing and the kind of, as we see India right now, the new India that we're looking at, I don't think participation in BRI without certain terms and conditions is a possibility at all for India.
Right, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naskar. Avni, I don't think we have time for further questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Naskar, for such an interactive seminar today. And I will, request Avni to move forward with the next step of the seminar.
Okay. With this, we come to an end to today's seminar. We thank Professor Naskar and Dr. Singh for gracing today's seminar with their presence and for giving us their precious time. We also thank the audience for joining us today. We would like to invite you to the upcoming Wednesday seminar. Further information regarding the event can be found at the ICS website. You may also subscribe to our newsletter for regular updates. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I express my thanks to ICS, to all the audience, the chair, and also the coordinator for having me over. A special thanks to Professor Acharya and her team for making this Wednesday seminar. It's very interesting, and I'm very happy to be a part of it. Bye bye, everyone. Thank you once again.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.